back to bring this series of studies to a culmination, drawing together a lot of what we've already said over the course of this last 2 days and a bit. Because you see, when you get to the end of the Bible, Yahweh demonstrates how he's going to fulfill all of his promises, and the three great covenants of the Bible are seen to be fulfilled in the last 3 chapters of the Bible, including the destruction of Nimrod and the way that that has been accomplished through the call of Abraham, so that all the families of the earth might be blessed in him and his seed. Now, in our studies, on one occasion last evening, I think we put up this particular chart. And you will recall that we mentioned that the black rectangular boxes are the visions of glory that appear in the Apocalypse. And this is an attempt to demonstrate where they sit in the scheme of things. We're going to have a look at Revelation 21, and I'll ask you to turn up Revelation 21. And I want to point out that in the scheme of things, the first 8 verses of Revelation 21 are actually beyond the end of the millennium. First 8 verses of Revelation 21, the vision of glory that you see there, is the period when God is all and in all. It is one of 3 places in the New Testament that you get a glimpse through the curtains beyond the millennium. Just a little glimpse. But it's a glimpse, of course, which is very, very important in relation to the study that we have been doing this weekend. So we'll come to that in due course. We're going to have a look this morning, as best we can with the time available, at Revelation 20, briefly, the serpent bound, and what that is. We're going to have a look at Revelation 21 and 22. And we're going to see in that the promises of God made to the fathers of Israel and made back in the Garden of Eden will all be fulfilled when these things are accomplished. So we have the culmination of the 3 great covenants in the last 3 chapters of the Bible. Revelation 20 is the final fulfilment of Genesis 3:15. The old serpent is seen to be bound. He's the old serpent because it's a reference to the one back in Genesis 3. And finally, at the end of the 1,000 years, that serpent is destroyed. Sin and rebellion are eradicated from the earth, and mortality or death is abolished. And so that which God promised in Genesis 3:15 to provide a redeemer, his son, the seed of the woman, who would finally crush the head of the serpent. We're going to talk about the stages in which that is done a little later on, perhaps in our exhortation. We're going to see that the statement that is made in Revelation 21 verse 6, it is done, actually governed the life and mission of our Lord Jesus Christ. In Revelation 21 we have the Abrahamic Covenant fulfilled. The holy city, it's an Abrahamic city, the one that Paul refers to in Hebrews 11 and 12 that we'll go to briefly this morning. That holy city is completed. The one nation that is left on the earth is the nation of Israel. It embraces all. The eternal inheritance experienced by all is that which was promised to Abraham. In Revelation 22 we have the promise made to David fulfilled. It begins with a throne. There is divine authority over all the earth, and we're not in any doubt about what that throne is and whose throne it is, because this is the throne referred to back in Revelation chapter 4 and 5. It's the throne of David. The one sitting upon it is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the son of David. That's why in Revelation 22 verse 16 he says, I am the root and the offspring of David. And so David's throne is seen to be established forever in that vision of Revelation 22. And the spiritual house of David, which by the way was the most important component to David of the promise that God made to him, not the throne, that's important, but the most important component was the house that God promised him. It's the word Baith that dominates 2 Samuel chapter 7. It's used 15 times. 5 times of a literal house and 10 times of a spiritual house. And it's that house that's referred to here in this promise, the completion of the bride of Christ, the house of David. And so we have the 3 great covenants of promise fulfilled in the last 3 chapters of the Bible. And of course, we know where these things sit in the scheme of things, because you see, brethren, it all begins here with the resurrection of the dead, the judgment seat, take about 12 months, the glorification of the saints, following 12 months Christ will spend with his bride, and then 4 or 5 years of preparation before they begin their work, many of them with Elijah 3.5 years before Armageddon, leading to the events of Armageddon and all the things that we've been talking about over the course of this weekend, though not in great detail in relation to that chart. And it leads, of course, to the establishment of the kingdom and on the destruction of the papacy and the beast that supports it. When the harlot system has been shown by Christ to be what it is, claims to be the bride of Christ, when it's been shown to be a harlot, and that system has been destroyed, though not all its adherents have been destroyed, that's the time when Christ will reveal the true bride, whose glory will have been held in until that time. That's the time he will reveal his true bride to the world. Papal dominion will have finished in 2060. And the next 1,000 years will see the end of all nations and all mortality and death. So you see, it's in that period that all nations are brought into one nation, the nation of Israel. And that was the story, wasn't it? We began on Thursday evening by looking at the apocalypse in Joshua, remember? In Joshua chapter 12, 31 kings destroyed, one nation left in the land, so to speak, the nation of Israel. Now that, the fact that Israel will remain as the only nation on earth, is the subject matter of the promise made to Abraham. I will make of thee a great nation. Israel is the only immortal nation. And there are 2 sections of Jeremiah that speak about that. Jeremiah 30 verse 11 is matched word for word by Jeremiah 46 verse 28. Though I make a full end of all nations, whither I have scattered thee, Israel, yet I will not make a full end of thee. We've been talking about the full end of all nations, haven't we? The full end of Edom, representing all nations. That's God's purpose. He's going to get rid of all the nations that Nimrod created when tongues were confused, when pure religion had been lost. It brought about the division of peoples into 70 nations, and now, of course, that's been multiplied. He's going to get rid of all nations and bring them back to one. He's going to give them a pure language, a pure religion. So you see this wonderful promise of God we're going to see is fulfilled in Revelation chapter 21. Now this was all prefigured by the Feast of Tabernacles, wasn't it? And the Feast of Tabernacles was a particularly important feast. It was the last feast. It was the third and last feast. In fact, the 8th day of this feast, though it was a separate day, not part of the feast, it was a separate day. The 8th day was the last holy convocation in Israel's religious year. So it's a very important time. And over the 7 days of the Feast of Tabernacles, they offered 70 bullocks. They began on day 1 with 13. Now, why would God ask them to begin on day 1 of the Feast of Tabernacles offering 13 bullocks? They offered the precise same number of lambs and goats. That never changed through the 7 days. But the number of the bullocks did change as the days progressed. Why would he ask them to start with 13? Well, 13 is the number of rebellion. 13 is the number of Nimrod. Nimrod was the 13th generation from Adam. His name means we will rebel. He was the cause of all the problem. He was the one that brought about the division of the peoples. He's responsible for the 70 nations that came out of the rebellion of Genesis 11. So why not start with 13? It's his number. So they start by offering 13 bullocks on day 1. On day 2 it was 12 bullocks. On day 3 it was 11 bullocks. On day 4 it was 10 bullocks. So they reduced the number of bullocks each day until they got down to day 7. Now day 7, of course, what's 7 the number of? Covenant. Which covenant? God's covenant to Abraham primarily. So why not offer 7 bullocks on day 7? That's what they did. And when you add up 13 plus 12 plus 11 plus 10 right down to 7, you get 70. There were 70 bullocks, the number of the nations, the division of the nations in Genesis chapter 10. So what feast will the nations keep in the millennium? Israel keeps the Passover. What feast do the nations keep? Well, you know what they keep. Zechariah 14 verse 16, they keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And when they keep the Feast of Tabernacles, they're going to be reminded for 1,000 years that all of them are going to be absorbed into one nation, the nation of Israel. That's what the millennium is about, to draw them all into one nation. But you see, there was a final day, as I said. You know, in John chapter 7 verse 37, you know what this day is referred to? On that great day of the feast. Now the Jews attached the 8th day to the 7 days of the Feast of Passover. But it wasn't actually part of the feast, it was a separate day. The final holy convocation of Israel's religious year. There was no more public holidays. This was the last one. It's the 7th month. They didn't keep Christmas. They didn't have any public holidays over Christmas. Their last public holiday was in the 7th month. So, the 8th day, just one bullock was offered. What does that represent? Well, it represents the one nation into which all of the 70 nations have been absorbed during the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Just one bullock, because there's only going to be one nation left on earth when God has completed his promises made to Abraham. I will make of thee a great nation. Here it is, at the end of the millennium. And when he's got that done, Nimrod has been abolished. Nimrod's work has been overthrown. Nimrod's rebellion has been repudiated. See what God did in the call of Abraham? You cannot separate the call of Abraham from what happened in the time of Nimrod. God's call of Abraham was about overthrowing Nimrod, about destroying him, reversing his work. That's what it was about. So this Feast of Tabernacles, there it is. If you want the details of this, of course, you've got to go to Numbers 29. And there is the list of the bullocks that they offered. And in Numbers 29, 35 to 36, on the 8th day they offered just that one bullock. This is the great day of the feast that's referred to in John 7, 37. Now there's a principle at work here, isn't there, brethren? He began with 13, ended with 7, the covenant, and the Sabbath rest. This is going to happen in the Sabbath rest. Hence it's very appropriate. It's on the 7th day of the feast. But the principle at work here is the principle of the Jew first and then the Gentile. Now that principle is illustrated in Scripture by 2 numbers. 12, which is the number of Israel, and 70, which is the number of the nation, or the nations, or the number of Gentiles. In Exodus 15 verse 27, we have a little imagery, a little picture, don't we, of Israel leaving Mara and coming to a place called Elim. Remember that story? They came to Elim. Now Elim means mighty ones. So they came to the place of mighty ones. And there they saw 12 wells of water surrounded by 70 palm trees. Now the palm trees wouldn't have been there if there hadn't been wells of water, would they? They needed the water. Now the 12 wells of water clearly represent Israel in the kingdom age, giving sustenance to the 70 palm trees. Now the palm tree is used in the Scripture as a symbol for the nation. There are many passages that prove that. One of them is Revelation chapter 7 and verse 9. Because the redeemed, who are taken out of all nations, kindreds and tongues, have palm branches in their hands. Because they're from all nations. So the 70 palm trees represent the 70 nations, while the 12 wells represent Israel in the kingdom age. That's why it's the place of mighty ones. Elim. In Luke chapter 9 and verse 1, which we've just read in our readings recently, Christ sent forth 12 disciples to preach the gospel. But in Luke 10 verse 1, he sent forth 70 disciples, 2 by 2, to preach the gospel. I wonder why. Well, it's the principle: to the Jew first and then to the Gentile. So in consecutive chapters in Luke, you have 12 and 70. In Revelation chapter 7, verses 4 to 8, you had the perfected Israel. 12 times 12,000 is 144,000. But then we're told who they represent in verse 9. The ones with the palm branches in their hands. The redeemed out of all nations. So you have this principle of Jew first, then the Gentile. And that is the principle that's been at work down through the ages. It will be the principle at work in the millennium. While these nations are absorbed back into the nation of Israel. Now I think I mentioned Psalm 59 verse 13 yesterday. Psalm 59:13 says this: "Consume them in wrath, consume them, that they may not be, and let them know that God ruleth in Jacob unto the ends of the earth." The idea? Jacob to the ends of the earth. So you've got Israel, the ends of the earth, the nations. This is the promise that Gabriel made to Mary, Luke 1:33. "And he, Christ, shall reign over the house of Jacob forever," or the age, "and of his kingdom there shall be no end." And we showed that that was actually territory, not time. There will be no end of the territory of his kingdom, proved, of course, by Isaiah 9 and verse 7. So there's the principle. 12, 70. Jacob, ends of the earth. Jacob, no end of the kingdom. All nations embraced by it. That's the principle that's being used here. And of course this entirely accords with why God divided the peoples in the time of Nimrod into 70. When he confused their language, that was an act of God. And there were 70 of them. Why 70? Well, Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 and 9. This is the biblical explanation as to why that was the case. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, and he means, of course, in the time of Nimrod, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. For Yahweh's portion is his people. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. But hang on. I thought Jacob had 12 sons. Yes, he did. But in Genesis chapter 46 and verse 27, when he came to Egypt, he had 70 progeny. Yes, so Jacob's initial family was 12 sons. But they multiplied, didn't they? By the time that he came into the land of Egypt, he had 70. 12, 70. Got the picture? When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, he divided them according to the number of the children of Israel. What he was saying, brethren, was, I'm going to bring all of those 70 back into one nation, Israel. So when he divided them, there was an inherent promise in that they'd all come back to be one. That's what he was doing. 12, 70 principle. It was marvellous, wasn't it? The way God's mind was at work to overthrow the mind of Nimrod. That is what he purposed in the beginning. And when the flood occurred, 100 years later, Nimrod's rebellion came. So 100 years before Nimrod, when the flood occurred, the fountains of the deep were broken up and the continents were clearly changed. There's no question about it. There was some movement. God put 12 tectonic plates on the earth's crust. I wonder why. I wonder why he put 12 tectonic plates. Well, because you see, he's signifying that he knew the rebellion was coming and that the nations would be scattered into 70. He's going to bring them back to Israel. 12. And I believe, brethren, that the earthquake of Armageddon, which will be unique, nothing ever like it in the past, will bring the earth's plate back to one. It's a 1,000-year prophecy, I believe, of the fact that at the end of the millennium, all nations, will be back to one. We'll wait and see. So Abraham leaves Ur the Chaldees, obeying the words that we read in Genesis 12, 1-3. 5 years later, those same words are repeated to him in Haran. He makes his way south to the land of Canaan. And we looked at this promise, didn't we? Genesis 12, verses 2 and 3. The first one, the most important one, the ultimate aim, the apocalyptic structure of the promise. It's the way God works. He gives you the last, final picture up front. Then he tells you how he's going to get there. I will make of thee a great nation. And the way he's going to do that is in the seventh. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. That's how I'm going to make a great nation. I'm going to convert people. Initially it's going to be one here and one there, but ultimately it's going to be the whole earth. That's what God is saying to Abraham. Now all of that, brethren, is introduction to Revelation 21. So let's come to Revelation 21. Now remember, these first 8 verses of Revelation 21 take us beyond the millennium. You want proof of that? Just wait. Revelation 21 verse 1 says, "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth." So there's a new government ruling over a new earth, populace. For the first. Now that word first should better be rendered former. The former heaven and the former earth were passed away. Now by former heaven and former earth he means the millennium. The millennial heavens and earth. He's referring to the 1,000-year reign of Christ. That passes away. So the 1,000-year reign of Christ is over. Christ hands the kingdom back to God. This is the situation that exists. And there was no more sea. Now, biblically, we know what sea represents. Represents nations, doesn't it? There were no more nations. There's just one left. And that one nation is then described in the following verses. In verse 2. "And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, come down from God out of heaven." So the heavens of the millennium are past. Now we've got a situation where there's no more nations, and he sees a city adorned as a bride. This is the final phase of the development of the ecclesia. And this city is identified, isn't it? Clearly identified. Because you read of its proportions. Not a literal city, of course. It's a symbolic city. It has city gates. And there are 12 of them. And they're identified with Israel. See verse 12? The last word of verse 12 is Israel. The gates have names, the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. The city is dominated by 12. There are 12 gates, there are 12 foundations, there are 12 apostles, there are 12 stones. The number 12, if you're, generous, if you take 144 as being 12 times 12 and you count that as 2 12s, even the number 12 occurs 12 times here. The city is a corporation of immortal people. That's what a city is. I'm not quite sure what you do in the United States of America, but in Australia you have to have 100,000 citizens in a town before it's called a city. You have to have a lot of people. A city is a corporation of people, not a collection of buildings. So this city is a group of people. It's the perfected ecclesia in its final manifestation. And it all began way back in Revelation 14 verse 1 at the foot of Mount Zion. And they saw the Lamb upon Mount Zion with 144,000. That was the beginning. This is the culmination that we're reading of here in Revelation 21. They're bringing to the end of the purpose of God. And it's illustrated by this city, this holy city. Now, look at its proportions. 12,000 furlongs. That's interesting, isn't it? What's 12,000 represent to a Hebrew? The family of Israel. doesn't it? 12 is the number of Israel. 1,000 represents a family. Judges 6:15. This is the family of Israel. 12, Israel, 1,000 family. It's a perfect cube. The most holy, all immortal because of the love of God. And we could take you to Ephesians chapter 3, verses 18 to 21, but there's something peculiar. You're actually given 4 dimensions. You don't need 4 dimensions for a perfect cube, do you? You only need 3. But there's 4. I wonder why. Well, we've talked about the importance of what God did to reverse Nimrod's work. Surrounded 4. Nimrod had 4 mega cities, remember? With 4 outposts, 4 corners. He had 2 mega cities like that, and when God brought Israel out of Egypt, he formed them into a 4 square encampment. Set about that task. The word city occurs in this final vision of Revelation 21:22 12 times. That can't be accidental, surely. This is the Abrahamic city, so you need to pop something into Revelation 21 and you need to come back with me to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews 11 and verse 10. For he looked for a city, Apollos, as the Greek word is, which hath foundations. Now this is talking about Abraham, of course, in verses 8 and 9. He looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Look at verse 16. Talking again about the patriarchs. But now they desire a better country, that is in heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called or surnamed their God. He named himself the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. For he hath prepared for them a city. Now this is the city being referred to in Revelation 21. How do we know that? When we turn the page to Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews 12 verse 22. But ye are come unto Mount Zion, and unto the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. Yeah, this is the one. Comes down out of heaven from God. And an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and ecclesia of firstborns. There's no article before that word, by the way, and there's no plural. No singular, it's plural. So it's the ecclesia of firstborns, which are written in heaven, and to God the judge of all, and to the spirits or characters of just men made perfect. That's the city we've come unto, brethren. We've come to the New Jerusalem. We want to be constituent members of it. That was the city that Abraham looked for, whose builder and maker was God. And in Revelation 21 you see it come down in the vision from God out of heaven. It's about the perfected ecclesia. And the ecclesia can only be perfected at the end of the millennium, in the wake of the second resurrection and second judgment and the abolition of mortality. So when the first promise of God is fulfilled and the serpent's been destroyed and death, sin and death are gone, that's the time when the ecclesia is perfected. That's when you get your holy city in its perfected form. And that's what David was looking for, his house. That's why you've got the 3 promises in the last 3 chapters of the Bible. This holy city is styled by Brother Thomas the New Jerusalem Body Politic and the Holy Jerusalem Association of Saints. He says this in Eureka Volume 1, page 115. He says it is the Yahweh Elohistic municipality. Now, a municipality is a city, isn't it? Symbolised by 144 cubits, which is the height of the wall. That's 12 times 12. Each cubit representing 1,000 of the numerical symbol of this holy nation. Notice the use of the term here, this holy nation. The Israel of the deity. In other words, he's saying that city and nation are equivalent terms, and they are, because a city is a collection of people, a nation is a collection of people, corporation of people. That's what this is, the perfected Jerusalem. So what we have seen in our studies is really, at the end of the day, a tale of two cities, isn't it? Two cities. We go right back to the city of Enoch that was built by Cain and rebuilt, at least revived in the sense that Nimrod named one of his cities after Enoch. All right, Erech. That city, of course, ultimately becomes reflective of Babylon. Nimrod established Babylon. On the other side of the equation, we have the city that comes down from God out of heaven. This is the one that Abraham looked for and that we look for. And the great conflict of the apocalypse, which we've seen a couple of times, is that Zion will be victorious over Rome, the Lamb over the beast, the bride over the drunken harlot, Mount Zion over the seven-hilled city, New Jerusalem over Babylon the Great, the holy city over the city of Sodom and Egypt, Rome. God of heaven will destroy the God of the earth. And those who are in Zion will have the seal of the living God, and those of the mark of the beast will be gone. The redeemed will have destroyed the beast, whose number is 666. And they will be called faithful and true. And this system shown to be led by a false prophet. That's the story, the great conflict of the apocalypse. Jacob will become Israel. One nation will be left upon earth, the nation of Israel. And Esau and Edom, gone, including the nations that Edom represents. Gone. The rebellion of Nimrod will have been reversed. There will be one language, Safar, Zephaniah 3 verse 9. One pure religion restored to all men. All nations, the 70 of Numbers 10, incorporated into one, Israel. All families of the earth blessed in Abraham and his seed. One city, a great nation remains in which all are immortal, the perfected bride of Christ. Sin and death finally abolished. God dwelling with men, happy to be on earth among men. And the words that came from the mouth of Nimrod, "We will rebel," will never be heard on earth again. But these are the words that will be heard, the words of Revelation 21 verse 6. And he said unto me, "It is done." Yes. It is done. We're going to take those words up in the exhortation a little later on this morning, God willing. They're the words that are going to be heard. Very loud shout. Will come from the mouth of immortal people. Because you see, it says in verse 4 of Revelation 21 that God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. And there shall be no more death. If there's no more death, we're beyond the millennium. Neither sorrow nor crying. There shall be not any more pain, for the former things are passed away. He that sat upon the throne said, "Behold, I make all things new." The words of Psalm 8. These words are true and faithful, brethren. It will be done in due course. Yahweh will destroy Nimrod and his legacy. Let's hope we're all there to see it.